آواز بلند سلوات.
محمد والی محمد.
پھر بھی سلوات.
اللہم صلی علی محمد والی محمد.
بانو کہاں تلاش کرے اپنے لال کو، بانو کہاں تلاش کرے اپنے لال کو، جنگل میں مار ڈالا ہے زہرا کی آل کو، زینب کے ساتھ روتی ہے سب مل کے بیویاں، زینب کے ساتھ روتی ہے سب مل کے بیویاں، جب دیکھتی تھی روز وہ وقت زوال کو، بانو کہاں تلاش
کرے اپنے لال کو،
شبیر دل کو تھام کے غش کھا کے گر پڑے، شبیر دل کو تھام کے غش کھا کے گر پڑے، دیکھا جو خون میں غرق نبی کے جمال کو، بانو کہاں تلاش کرے اپنے لال کو، شبیر میرے پاس ہے صدقے کو بس یہی، شبیر میرے پاس ہے صدقے کو بس یہی، جھولے سے لا کے دے دیا بانو نے لال کو، بانو کہاں تلاش کرے اپنے لال کو، شبیر لا رہے ہیں میدان سے دیکھیے، شبیر لا رہے ہیں میدان سے دیکھیے، اپنے ضعیف کاندھوں پر 18 سال کو، بانو کہاں تلاش کرے اپنے لال کو بازار شام میں وہ اسیروں کا قافلہ بازار شام میں وہ اسیروں کا قافلہ عابد نہ بھول پائے کبھی اس خیال کو بانو کہاں تلاش کرے اپنے لال کو لیلا دعائیں کرتی رہی باد کربلا لیلا دعائیں کرتی رہی باد کربلا یا رب جدا نہ کرنا کسی ماں کو لال کو بانو کہاں تلاش کرے اپنے لال کو شبیر اپنے روز پہ بلوائیں گے ضرور شبیر اپنے روز پہ بلوائیں گے ضرور توقیر تو نکال دے دل سے ملال کو بانو کہاں تلاش کرے اپنے لال کو جنگل میں مار ڈالا ہے زہرا کی آل کو صلوات باردی کا صلوات حضرت حر کی شان میں ایک سلام پیش کرتا ہوں باردی کا صلوات اے حر نہ اٹھ سکے گا لاشا جواں پہ سر کا اے حر نہ اٹھ سکے گا لاشا جواں پہ سر کا اے حر نہ اٹھ سکے گا لاشا جواں پہ سر کا سنتے ہیں کام ہے یہ شبیر کے جگر کا سنتے ہیں کام ہے یہ شبیر کے جگر کا، مہماں کے واسطے بھی خیموں میں کچھ نہیں ہے، مہماں کے واسطے بھی خیموں میں کچھ نہیں ہے، یہ حال ہو گیا ہے اے حر سخی کے گھر کا، یہ حال ہو گیا ہے اے حر سخی کے گھر کا، چل چادر شہادت اب جا کے اوڑھ لے تو، چل چادر شہادت اب جا کے اوڑھ لے تو، پھر جو سو جا رن میں جا کر جاگا ہے رات بھر کا، پھر سو جا رن میں جا کر جاگا ہے رات بھر کا، دنیا کے مال و زر کو ٹھکرا کے آنے والے، دنیا کے مال و زر کو ٹھکرا کے آنے والے، رومال فاطمہ کا ہے تاج تیرے سر کا، رومال فاطمہ کا ہے تاج تیرے سر کا، ذرے یہاں پہ آ کے خورشید بن گئے ہیں، ذرے یہاں پہ آ کے خورشید بن گئے ہیں، یہ معجزہ ہے اے حر صبت نبی کے گھر کا، یہ معجزہ ہے اے حر صبت نبی کے گھر کا، آہ شام ہوتے ہوتے کوئی نہیں رہے گا، آہ شام ہوتے ہوتے کوئی نہیں رہے گا، خون میں ڈھلے گا پرچم عباس نامور کا، خون میں ڈھلے گا پرچم عباس نامور کا، ہر ایک دھڑکتے دل کو تڑپائے گا ہمیشہ، ہر ایک تڑپتے دل کو تڑپائے گا ہمیشہ، یہ واقعہ مصادق پرخون دوپہر کا، یہ واقعہ مصادق پرخون دوپہر کا، اے حر نہ اٹھ سکے گا لاشا جواں پہ سر کا، اے حر نہ اٹھ سکے گا لاشا جواں پہ سر کا، سنتے ہیں کام ہے یہ شبیر کے جگر کا، صلوات۔
Assalamu alaikum. Tonight we're going to have night 3 of the lecture from Maulana Qazwini. Before we get started, there's a couple of housekeeping matters. On Sunday at Zenabia, we'll have a Majlis for the booth of Imam Ali Akbar. So we request all community members to please attend. And then for Jummah tomorrow, Milana will be reciting Jummah at 1:40. So inshallah, everyone can make it for namaz as well. And we will have Milana Qazwini leading the Majlis, leading the khutbah and Jummah on Friday. And so with that, inshallah, I will ask Milana to give his lecture. We're honored to have him once again join us from California and look forward to night 3 of his lecture. So, salawat, please.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين حبيب إله العالمين أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المنتجبين صلى الله وسلم عليك يا رسول الله صلى الله وسلم عليك يا أبا عبد الله يا رحمة الله الواسعة ويا باب نجاة الأمة يا ليتنا كنا معكم سيدي فنفوز فوزا عظيما. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. يا قومي لكم الملك اليوم ظاهرين في الأرض فمن ينصرنا من بأس الله إن جاءنا قال فرعون ما أريكم إلا ما أرى وما أهديكم إلا سبيل الرشاد. صدق الله العلي العظيم وصلوا على محمد وآل محمد. In chapter number 40 of the Quran, we are told of the story of a man who is not mentioned by name, but he is referenced as mu'min min ali Fir'aun, a believer from the house of the Pharaoh. And some commentators have suggested that this believer was either from the house of Pharaoh, meaning that he was a relative of the Pharaoh, or he was an Israelite. And some commentators have suggested that no, it could not have been an Israelite because the criticisms and the warnings that came from him could not have come from an Israelite because of how Israelites were persecuted. It must have been someone who was a higher level and someone who was more influential. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
This is for the ladies and the kids. Sorry.
So, in this verse, what he warns is the following. He says that, O people, the believing man, he says, O people, O house of Fir'aun. He says that you have strength, you have been given authority, you have sovereignty over the land. But don't think that that would protect you from God's might or God's punishment if it came to you. And the response of Fir'aun, the Pharaoh, was the following. He said, O people, he said, Ma urikum illa ma ara, meaning that I will not show you, the literal interpretation is, I will not show you except that which I see. Meaning that since I am the ruler There's only one way to see things, and I'm going to show you what I see. And if you think about it in contemporary times, there is a tendency, across the ages of the ruling class to show the people what they see through the lens that they see, and not through any other way. And Fir'aun was an interesting individual because in some instances he was very sharp, he was very shrewd and very calculating, but in other instances he wasn't so sharp and calculating. For instance, they say that when it came to his personal life, because he had claimed to be at the status of the gods, he had claimed to be a god man. In fact, he tells, in these verses, he tells his minister, he tells him to build a tower that is so high up, so elevated, that he could peek upon the God of Moses. Within his personal life, they say that, in order to maintain that status of being a god man, he would consume nothing but bananas. Because, as a god, he couldn't be seen going to the bathroom. So he had to come up with a solution. But in other ways, he was pretty smart, he was pretty calculating. So in terms of disseminating propaganda, in terms of controlling the people through information, he was ahead of his time. So, for instance, when Moses appears and when he begins to give people signs and when he begins to guide them, what is the response of the Fir'aun? What he says is, he places himself on the side of the people. And he says, look, people, I'm on your side. And what I fear is that he is going to change your ways, and because he's going to change your ways of thinking, he's going to deviate your way of thinking, and through that, he is going to brainwash you, and he is going to spread corruption and deviation in the land. إِنِّي أَخَافُ أَن يُبَدِّلَ دِينَكُمْ أَوْ أَن يُظْهِرَ فِي الْأَرْضِ الْفَسَادِ. That's what the Fir'aun said. I'm afraid that he's going to change your deen, meaning your path, and that he's going to make a fasad more... He's going to spread fasad, he's going to spread corruption on the earth. And so, psychologically to his people, he put himself on their side, meaning, look, I'm on your side, I'm on your team, and I don't want you to go astray. I don't want you to be misguided by the teachings of Moses. So in some ways he was shrewd and calculating and smart, and in other ways he wasn't so bright. So what he says is, oh people, look, since I am the ruler, you will see nothing except from the way that I see, from the lens that I see. And what the mu'min of Al-Fir'aun says is, he says, look, the might and the superiority that you have, it's not going to last a long time if God decides to change. And this mu'min is interesting because of his language, it's apparent that he was well versed in the historical tradition. Because he begins to warn them of the people of Nuh, he begins to warn them of the people of Ad and Thamud, the people who are essentially mentioned in the Quran. So he was an enlightened individual, and he's the same person that also appears in another set of verses when Musa defends one of his people. He comes to the rescue of one of his people, and he strikes a man, he knocks him down and he kills him, and now there's a bounty on Musa's head. Well, this same mu'min from the house of Fir'aun, the same believer, is the one who comes to Musa and he tells him, look, you got yourself in trouble, there's a bounty, do yourself a favor and get lost. And so Musa leaves, he disappears for a few years, and he comes back empowered because when he travels, first of all, he gets married, so he's very, very strong. And second of all, he has inspiration from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So what's interesting about this verse is that it describes a mentality, it's my way or the highway mentality. The reason I mention this and why it's important to reflect upon this verse during the days of Ashura is because sometimes, when stakes are high and when emotions are deep, we tend to only see things from our perspective. In fact, physiologically speaking, as we spoke about in the last few nights, there's that part of our brain, once it gets activated, our vision also becomes very narrow. So that inner part of our brain, the amygdala, when we're in a fit of rage, when we're experiencing anger, or when we're experiencing lust and passion, what happens to our vision is that it becomes narrowed. We only begin to see in a certain way through a certain lens. And so many people today, their behavior, and this is not particular only to the Fir'aun and the followers of Fir'aun. You have Muslims today from all different backgrounds and all different schools of thought where it's the attitude that they carry is, it's my way or the highway. I'm right and you're wrong. The Quran says to the Holy Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam in one verse. It says, وَلَن تَرْضَى عَنْكَ الْيَهُودَ وَلَا النَّصَارَى حَتَّى تَتَّبِعْ مِلَّتَهُم. It says, Ya Rasulullah, there are a group of people, and during that time those people happened to be the Jews and the Christians. And this is not a generalization, but during that time they happened to be the Jews and the Christians. That they will not be satisfied with you until you follow them and their law and their direction. Meaning that no matter what you do to satisfy them, they're not going to be satisfied. You have to follow them. You have to see things specifically through their narrow lens. And some commentators, they say that, well, the Prophet, he knew what his task was, he knew what his responsibility was, but he was also a very good-hearted individual. Sometimes when we're good-hearted, we want everyone to be happy with us. Even if you stand for something, sometimes it's just a personality trait that you want everybody to be happy with you. You want there to be peace in the household. Sometimes there's that one person in the household that they're just there to create and maintain and sustain the peace. They just want there to be peace. So God tells the Prophet that yes, you do pursue peace, but understand that sometimes you can get taken advantage of, because some of the people that you're dealing with, they're not going to be happy, they're not going to be satisfied until you follow what they want you to follow. You have to be following their same manhaj, meaning that their same plan and their same school of thought. It's unfortunate to see that even within the Ahlul Bayt school of thought, that there are people that call for unity, however, they're not willing to unite from people from the same school of thought. If they see you practice in a certain way in the month of Muharram or in the month of Ramadan, then they go to war against you. And they try to create division, and they try to create sabotage. So that stems from this attitude that's mentioned in the Quran. The attitude of Fir'aun. مَا أُرِيكُمْ إِلَّا مَا أَرَى. That you will not see except that which I see. There is no other way except the way that I see. There's an interesting story that's narrated about one of the scholars who lived in the 8th century. His name was Wasil ibn Ata. Wasil ibn Ata is known as the founder of the Mu'tazili school of thought. And during that time, during the 8th century, we're talking about 100 to 200 years after the advent of the religion of Islam, different philosophical schools of thought began to emerge. And so as the Islamic empire expanded, in certain areas, certain schools of thought were more prevalent than in other areas. So for instance, if you study the history of Baghdad, the city of Baghdad became the center of the Islamic Caliphate and also the center of Islamic learning during the time of the Abbasids, which coincided in our history during the time of the 6th Imam of the school of Ahlul Bayt, Al-Imam Ja'far bin Muhammad al-Sadiq alayhi salam. And so the Mu'tazili school of thought was based there. So Wasil ibn Ata, it's narrated that one day he was walking with a group of people. And they came across a group of Khawarij. Now who were the Khawarij? The Khawarij were the seceders. They were the people that had very, very extreme beliefs, and they formulated during the time of Imam Ali alayhi salam. And the way that they formulated, or the way that they came together and formed as a group, was that initially they were fighting on the side of Amir al-Mu'mineen during the battles of Jamal and Siffin. But what happened towards the end of the Battle of Siffin, during the arbitration between the army of the Imam and the army of Muawiyah ibn Abi Sufyan, was that they broke off, they split, and that's why they were known as the Khawarij. Kharij means to exit from somewhere, so to exit or to secede. So they developed their own very, very extreme beliefs, and they went to the point where they said that sin, any kind of sin, renders a person a disbeliever. So in practice, these were people who were known by the marks on their foreheads. They were known by their memorization of the Quran. They had all of those trimmings. They were people who would spend their entire nights in prayer, but it really meant nothing because they disbelieved in their Imam. And they referred to the Imam as a disbeliever. They created their own little, they were little bands of thugs that would travel and they would terrorize people. And they were also pretty well versed with the Quran, so they weren't ignorant. But they took it to the other extreme. So Wasil ibn Ata and a group of his people, they walked by the Khawarij. And they were the type of people who thought, it's our way or the highway. And if you don't believe in what we believe, then you're also a disbeliever. And if you're a disbeliever, then you get the sword. So Wasil was a very informed person. He was a scholar. And so as they come across, they're stopped. Wasil and his group are stopped by the Khawarij. And so they're questioned about their beliefs. And Wasil immediately, instead of saying we're Muslims of this belief of the Mu'tazili, whatever, he says that we're a group of mushrikeen, we're a group of polytheists. And then he cites a verse in the Quran. There's a verse in the Quran found in chapter number 9, Surah At-Tawbah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala instructs the Prophet and the believers that if you are to come across the mushrikeen, if you are to come across the polytheists, then let them hear the word of God, meaning preach to them and teach them, and then deliver them to a secure place. So imagine how extreme these people were, that Wasil, who was a Muslim, and his followers are also Muslim, had to disguise themselves as non-Muslims in order to save their lives from the Khawarij. So he says, we are a group of mushrikeen, or he says they are a group of mushrikeen, and then he cites that verse. And he tells them, teach us. He says, we want to learn what your beliefs are. So they teach the beliefs. And then they say, okay, well now you have to be a part of our group. He says, no. The verse in the Quran says, then deliver them to a secure place. So they thought to themselves, they turned around, they said, no, you're right. I mean, we've memorized the Quran, we know the verse, and you're right. So they deliver him to a secure place. So Wasil was able to save his life and the lives of his people by disguising himself as a non-Muslim. And sometimes it's interesting, you find that as a Muslim living among non-Muslims, sometimes you're safer than if you were to live amongst Muslims. One of the earliest scholars to leave the Middle East and travel to Europe, and this quote, some have attributed it to Jamaluddin Afghani, some have attributed it to another scholar. When he went, he was among the first scholars to leave the Middle East and travel to Europe. He went to Paris, he stayed for a time in Paris, and this was in the 1800s. He came back, and he said his famous statement. He said, in the West, in Europe, I saw kuffar that act in the way that Muslims should act. Where here, we have Muslims that act in the way that kuffar act. And so, it's interesting because much of that is born out of that my way or the highway mentality, where you have to follow what I follow. You have to believe what I believe. And if not, then it's the sword to your neck. The reason I mention this is because when it comes time for Muharram and our practice of certain rituals, many people, they take it to the extreme. And they think that there is only one certain way to practice. There's only one certain way to grieve. If you grieve, that you can only grieve this amount, you can't grieve any more than that amount. And the reality is we begin to understand things in a better light once we have a paradigm shift. once we see things from a different light. There's an author that wrote a book, and in the beginning of the book he talks about a paradigm shift, how when you begin to look at things from a different lens, you begin to behave differently. One of the examples that he gives, he says that, he gives a personal example. He says, one day I was sitting in the subway system in a train, and a gentleman boarded the train. And he had his children with him. He had young children with him. And as soon as the gentleman sat down, his children began to wreak havoc. They were shouting, they were jumping up and down, they were pulling things from other passengers. And the gentleman seemed to not really care. He was passive. He just, he had his head down. And so he said, I watched this unfold. I watched it unfold. He says, after a while, I thought, this can't go on for the rest of the train ride. People are tired, and what's this guy doing? His kids are getting out of hand. And so he turns to the gentleman. He says, sir, he says, is it possible that you quiet down your kids? He says, the gentleman looked up. He turned to him, and it's almost like he was in a different world. He turned to him. He says, you're right. He says, I'll try to, but you have to excuse me because my children and I just left the hospital where my wife passed away in front of us. And they just lost their mother. He says, at that moment, the guy who's telling the story, the author, he says, at that moment, everything changed. He says, why? Because I begin to see things from a completely different lens. He says, all of a sudden, I was overwhelmed with the feeling of sympathy. I wanted to sympathize. I wanted to help this man. I began to apologize. So when you see things from a different lens, you begin to behave differently. There's an author who today is a highly successful entrepreneur. His name is known in the news, and he wrote a book about some of the principles that he learned throughout his life and some of the principles that he wants to teach. And so he said that most of the time there are two things that hold people back. Number one is your blind spot. When you're driving on the freeway, and there are cars that can now automatically detect this now, but it's still safe to look over your shoulder because there's a blind spot. So even though you have the rear view mirror and you have the mirrors on the side, have you ever, sometimes you drive and you check the mirror and you don't hear a car, but you begin to merge into the lane and all of a sudden someone honks their horn because you didn't look over into your blind side. That's why they say that you have to turn your neck and look over into your blind side. So number one is your blind side or your blind spot, and number two is ego. Those are the two things that hold people back. So find a way to alleviate that. So especially when emotions are deep and stakes run high, we begin to have tunnel vision and only see things in a certain way. The reason I mentioned this, and one of the things that I wanted to talk about, which is related to our topic in the last few nights, is the issue of ikhtilaf, disagreement, in the early days of Islam. When we talk about the whole idea of religion and spirituality, and yesterday we mentioned that Pew poll, how 27% of adults in the United States, when asked whether they considered themselves religious or no, and whether they were spiritual or no, they chose spirituality over religion. And the trends that we have, the rise in atheism and also the rise in agnosticism. And a lot of that, when you begin to study it, you realize that people who leave the faith or prefer spirituality over religion or prefer agnosticism over religion, many of them do so because they come across religious laws that they simply don't understand. They can't make sense of. They can't reconcile. How can this be a religion of peace while if someone disagrees with you and leaves the faith, he gets his head chopped off? That's an issue that exists. So how do we talk about apostasy? What does that mean? Well, number one, in order to understand controversial issues, always, whenever we have a controversial issue, it's important to look behind controversial headlines. I'll give you an example. There was a headline that it was actually more than one headline that I was reading. And, in the last few years, 4 or 5 years, when you had the surge and rise in certain extremist groups that were terrorizing people worldwide, I found a few articles that were written, and some of these articles contained a specific picture, and it's this picture that maybe some of you have come across as well. The reality is that the picture comes from a play, a theatrical production of what happened to the family of Imam Hussein after the day of Ashura. So there's a caravan of women, there's a line of women that are walking, and they're wearing black from head to toe, and their faces are covered, and they're wrapped together by chains. And it's clearly from a theatrical production. You can tell that it's from a theatrical production. But the headlines of these articles would say, look, these guys are on the rise, these Muslims are on the rise, and if you're not careful, this image that you see is coming to a town near you. It's coming to Atlanta, Georgia. It's coming to Los Angeles, California. It's coming to New York, New York. And so for many people, you know, as human beings, we're very picture-oriented. We're very vision-oriented. So the first thing that people see, it freaks them out. That's why another topic that we need to discuss, brothers and sisters, is whatever we believe to be true is one thing, and what we display in front of the world is another thing. So there are certain practices, especially around the time of Muharram, especially around the time of Ashura, that even if you hold them dear, and even if you practiced them 30 or 40 years ago in your home country, it's different than displaying it on YouTube and putting pictures on Google. Why? Because that causes people to draw a negative image of what you're doing, no matter how good you are in your heart, no matter how noble your message is. So we have to be careful about what we put out there. Privacy is key. And there are a lot of, and the truth is it's not that we're hiding what we're doing, but there are a lot of layers of understanding to what we do. So, you know, going back to that issue is, number one, that we have to be able to look behind provocative headlines. But what does apostasy represent? What is disagreement? In the early days of Islam, what you find is that the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when he first established the community in Medina, that community, the members of that community were like citizens of a country. Meaning what? Meaning that in the same way that you're a citizen of a country, there are certain rights that you have, there are certain privileges that you enjoy, but there are also certain responsibilities that you have towards your country and its people. For instance, if you're a citizen here, you have many privileges. One of them, everybody likes paying taxes. That's a privilege. You get to pay taxes. Another is that if you're a citizen and there's a draft, you have to enroll in that draft if you're in a certain age range. If you ignore the letter once or twice, they begin to send it in a different color. It comes in the mail. If you're not 18 yet, you're going to get it. But there are also certain rights and certain responsibilities, certain privileges. If you're not a citizen, you don't get some of those rights. For instance, you don't get the right to vote. That's a right that only a citizen gets. After you have proved that you're a citizen and you're loyal and you understand the laws of the country and you haven't committed felonies and whatnot, because all of those can impede you gaining your citizenship. In that simple way, the Muslim community was like an ummah. The members of the community were like citizens. The reason I give this example is because it makes it a little bit easier to understand what apostasy was and what apostasy is today. Now, what happens if a citizen of the United States renounces their citizenship? They move to another country and they decide to renounce their citizenship. Nothing. There's a story. One of the founders of Facebook, Eduardo Savern, after he made his hundreds of millions of dollars, he decided to move to Singapore. And when he was in Singapore, I guess he earned citizenship or something like that. He wasn't living in the United States anymore, so he figured, why should I pay taxes to the country that I'm not living in anymore? And the taxes would have been in the tens of millions of dollars. So in order to avoid those taxes, he renounced his citizenship. What happened there? Nothing. Did we send a drone to take him out? Did we send a SWAT team, commandos? Nothing. Nothing happened. He renounced his citizenship. Now, on the other hand, what happens if a person not only renounces their citizenship but goes to war against the country? What is that called? When you jeopardize the security. What do they call that? When you give secrets to the enemy. You call it treason. It's treachery. And here, how is it punishable? It's punishable by what? It's punishable by death, and in many countries. Here's the difference, and I mention that because when it comes to apostasy law, sometimes we confuse the two things. Now, there was a difference in the time of the Prophet, in the time of the Khulafa, in the time of the Imams between the two situations. There were people that they just wanted to renounce their Islam. They just wanted to renounce their citizenship, and nothing at all happened to them. We have many of those examples. One of those examples was with the first group of believers that migrated from Mecca during the first hijrah, from Mecca to Ethiopia, Habasha. And they sought refuge there. Well, Habasha, the kingdom of Ethiopia at the time, was a Christian nation. They had a Christian king, and they gave refuge to the early Muslims. Many years later, those Muslims, after Medina had been established as a city, as a sanctuary, as a safe place, they left Ethiopia, they left Habasha to go to Medina. And the leader of that group was Ja'far ibn Abi Talib, the brother of Imam Ali and the cousin of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. One of the early Muslims decided to convert to Christianity. History tells us that he decided to renounce his citizenship, and he converted to Christianity. What happened? Nothing. Nothing. I mean, his wife left him, but nobody threatened his life. His wife wanted to remain as a Muslim. She wanted to be part of the Muslim community. But nothing happened. We have other instances where people accepted Islam and then they renounced their faith. During the time of the Khulafa, during the time of the Imams, nothing happened. But if a person was to leave and undermine the security and undermine the well-being of the people, that was a different story. Chapter number 60 of the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, verse number 1, Ya ayyuha alladhina amanu, la tattakhidu aduwi wa aduwakum awliya. O you who believe, do not take my enemy and your enemy as awliya. What are the awliya? Who are the awliya? Awliya are not just friends. Awliya are the people that have walaya. That's where the word comes from. Walaya is to have authority and influence. And if you've noticed, most of us, the tastes that we have for cars, the taste that we have for clothes, the habits that we have, certain preferences that we have, most of them are shaped by our association. So you see in high school and in college and in junior high and in elementary school, cliques form of people who believe in the same thing. They dress the same way. They begin to speak in the same way. Have you ever hung out with a group of people and within a day you begin to speak in the same way as them? You begin to use the same words as them? Happens more so often when you're younger. That's because you can choose your environment, but once you choose your environment, you can't choose the influence. I've seen many people say, well, I'm a good person. I can hang out in this area with these people and it's not going to affect me. Wrong. You don't choose who affects you. You don't choose who influences you. You choose where to put yourself, but once you choose to put yourself in that situation, the influence is not under your control. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, O you who believe, those who are going to war against you, don't put yourself in a position where they become your awliya, where they become your primary source of influence. And the reason this was revealed is because it said that one of the companions of the Prophet, a very well-intentioned person and a believer, had sent a letter to the people of Mecca before the Muslims left Medina to go conquer Mecca. He sent in secret a letter to the people of Mecca, some of the people of Quraysh, disclosing the plans of the Prophet. Now what happens when you disclose military secrets? We know the answer to that. So what he did was tantamount to that. He was disclosing secrets. Somehow, narrations tell us that through divine inspiration, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala informs the Prophet. So the Prophet sends Ali ibn Abi Talib. He sends him on the way. He intercepts the messenger, and the messenger is summoned. The letter is taken from the messenger. It's read. The Prophet looks to him. And as soon as it's read, one of the companions, who was kind of known for being a hothead, he said, Ya Rasulullah, off with his head. He's disclosed secrets, off with his head. So the Prophet turns to him and he asks the question. Sometimes you have to ask people what their intentions are. Have you noticed when you use this thing that God has given you called the tongue, and we use it in so many bad ways, sometimes you need to use it in a good way. Ask people what their intentions are. What I was talking about, the author that had written the book based on his experiences of seeing things one way and another way, one of the chapters in that book that he writes is seek first to understand, then be understood. But most of us, we want to be understood, then we want to understand. When you ask people what your intentions are, why do you think the way you are thinking? What is significant to you? You know, when you're taught, one of the things that you're taught and through personal experience that I have, when you're taught to counsel people who are going through bereavement, you need to ask them questions, because most people, they know the truth, it's within them, and they know clearly what their intentions are, but sometimes they simply want to verbalize. You know, sometimes we make things much harder than they are. Gentlemen, sometimes your wife just wants to be listened to. She just wants to be heard. That's it. It's a very, very, very easy task, but I was reading somewhere, it was saying that for most people, the average interruption time is 17 seconds. 17 seconds and that's it. I have to give my own input. So, understanding people, having empathy, all of that requires patience. So the Prophet asked him, instead of chopping his head off, he asked him, he said, well, what was your intention? He says, did you disbelieve? أَكَفَرْتَ بَعْدَ الْإِيمَانِ? He said, did you disbelieve after accepting belief? He said, no, Ya Rasulullah, that's not the story. He says, I still have faith in my heart, meaning I haven't renounced my citizenship. I still have faith in my heart. I still have love in my heart. But my concern was fear that we would all go to Mecca, and each and every single one of these companions that are going to Mecca, they have someone in Mecca that's going to protect them. So if something goes wrong, they have family members that will protect them. I have no one to protect me. And so out of fear and out of concern, I sent this letter to the people that I know, so that if I do arrive to Mecca with the army and things do go wrong, I won't lose my life. So the Prophet understood and he forgave him. There was no harm that was done. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sends that decree, Ya ayyuha alladhina amanu, la tattakhidu aduwi wa aduwakum awliya. So if people are undermining security, if they are undermining social order, it's different than if people just change their mind. Sometimes people, their commitment changes. They say that they love something, or they say that they love someone, and a few years later, that love disappears for whatever reason. Sometimes hearts can change. The model of the Ahlul Bayt alayhi salam, however, is live and let live. That was the model of Imam Hussein alayhi salam. You know, Imam Hussein alayhi salam, he could have had a feud with whoever he wanted, and nobody would have said anything to him. There are so many instances of people that came to him, and the Imam could have said, look, I'm your Imam, and if you don't follow me, you're going to hell. Did the Imam ever say that? Never once did he say that. He could have used that card, and he never used that card. He never dealt that card. So the model of the Ahlul Bayt alayhi salam is live and let live. If people disagree with you, so what? Let them disagree with you. Instead of getting all upset, what you need to do is become a leader and inspire people. Show people a better example, an example for good. So I wanted to mention that in the case of apostasy, because a lot of people today, they look at headlines and they get confused. Now over the years, what happened? Some people confused the two cases. So every once in a while, we hear of someone that's killed because they renounced their faith. It's important for us to understand and distinguish between a misunderstanding of the Islamic law and what the essence of Islamic law says, and that is to live and let live. That's the example that we take from the Prophet and from the Ahlul Bayt alayhi salam. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Now I want to direct your attention towards Karbala. On the 1st of Muharram, Imam Hussein alayhi salam had stopped in an area where he was intercepted by a group led by Al-Hurr ibn Yazid al-Riyahi. Now, when Imam Hussein alayhi salam left Mecca, it was because there was a command, there was an order that was sent to Mecca by Yazid, that's saying that get the allegiance, secure the Pledge of Allegiance from Hussein, and attack him even if he is clinging to the walls of the Kaaba. So Imam Hussein, he recognized the sanctity of the city of Mecca. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, وَمَنْ دَخَلَهُ كَانَ آمِنًا. He who enters it shall be safe. If you're there, for those of you who have performed the Umrah and the Hajj, you know that Mecca is a sanctuary. Even a fly is protected. You know, many years later in Kufa, they asked Abdullah ibn Abbas, the cousin of Imam Hussein. They said that what is the expiation? What is the kafara? What is the penalty that one must pay if you are in the state of ihram and you are in the sanctuary of Mecca and you kill a fly? He says, you're asking about the expiation of a fly, how much you have to pay and what the penalty is for a fly, yet you shed the blood of the grandson of the Prophet like it was nothing? Imam Hussein alayhi salam understood that Mecca was a sanctuary, it was a safe place. And if there was going to be bloodshed, that he would not be the cause. He was going to take the moral high ground. So on the day of Arafat, Imam Hussein could not complete his Hajj. He exited from the state of Ihram, but he delivered a very powerful sermon. And he said, O people, he delivered the following. He said, خُطَّ الْمَوْتِ عَلَى وُلْدِ آدَمْ مَخَطَّ الْقِلَادَةِ عَلَى جِيدِ الْفَتَاةِ. Such a beautiful, eloquent expression. He says, death has been prescribed unto Banu Adam. It sits and it waits for Banu Adam in the same way that a necklace sits on the neck of a young woman. That's its place, meaning that death is for you, and death will come to you no matter what. خط الموت على ولد آدم مخط القلادة على جيد الفتاة وما أولهني إلى أسلافي اشتياق يعقوب إلى يوسف. He says, I am longing to meet my predecessors. I am longing to meet my father. I am longing to meet my grandfather. I am longing to meet my brother and my brother Al-Hasan in the same way that Yaqub was longing to see his son Yusuf. And Yaqub wept and wept until he lost his eyesight. And he did not settle until he saw his son many, many years later. وَمَا أَوْلَهَنِي إِلَىٰ أَسْلَافِي اشْتِيَاقَ يَعْقُوبَ إِلَىٰ يُوسُف. He exited the state of Ihram and he took the journey. And it took around 23 days from the time Imam Hussein left Mecca and arrived in Karbala. He arrives on the 2nd. But on the 1st of Muharram, he is about to head eastward into the city of Kufa, but he is intercepted by Al-Hurr ibn Yazid al-Riyahi. By the time Al-Hurr arrives, they had gone through so much rough terrain that they were basically weakened and they were thirsty. They were in a position where if Imam Hussein wanted, he could have attacked them and annihilated the whole group. But Imam Hussein's philosophy was, I will not strike first, no matter what. Even on the day of Ashura, as they were thirsty, blocked off from the river for 3 days, he said, I will not strike first. It's not in our akhlaq to strike first. So Al-Hurr turns to him. He says, Yabna Rasulullah. And Al-Hurr was from a very noble family. He was from a very noble family. And in those few days, he made decisions and choices that changed the course of his family for the rest of eternity. You know, we have scholars from the Ahlul Bayt school of thought who are blessed to come from the lineage of Al-Hurr. When you go to visit Al-Hurr in Karbala, there's an area a little bit outside of Karbala. When you go to visit the shrine of Al-Hurr to pay respects, there's a plaque and it mentions all of the scholars that descend from the lineage of Al-Hurr. People who were honored to be of the lineage of Al-Hurr. How many people were from the lineages of Umar ibn Sa'ad that are honored to be from that lineage? Or Shimr ibn Yazid? Or Shimr ibn Dil-Jawshan? Or Sinan ibn Anas? Does anyone have honor that comes from that privilege? That comes from that lineage? Al-Hurr made the right decision. And sometimes, brothers and sisters, our decisions, our choices that we do on a daily basis, they affect not only us, they affect our children, they affect our grandchildren. It's hard to perceive that when you're young, but understand when you're young, the decisions that you make today, they're going to affect your children. They're going to affect your grandchildren. So Al-Hurr says, Yabna Rasulullah. He says, I know who you are. You are a man of nobility. I'm not here to fight you, but I have my orders. Imam Hussein says, then let me go back to Mecca. Let me go back south. He says, I cannot. I cannot let you do that. He says, I plead with you. He says, take a path. فَخُذْ طَرِيقًا نَصَفًا بَيْنِي وَبَيْنَكَ. Take a path that is medium between you and me. I will go back to Ubaydullah ibn Ziyad and I will make up an excuse. Because his orders was to arrest Imam Hussein and bring him to Kufa. He says, please. During that time, narrations say that the Asr prayer took place. And the Imam said that us and our group are going to offer the Asr prayer. He says, you are free to lead your group. Al-Hurr says, no, I want to pray behind you. You are my Imam, I want to pray behind you. But I have my orders and I am afraid. Imam Hussein alayhi salam You know, he could have played the imam card. He could have said, no, I'm your imam and I'm gonna attack you and there's nothing that you can do about it. He said, fine, I respect that. I know that you have your commands, I respect that. Allow me to take another path. But Imam Hussein alayhi salam, brothers and sisters, was ghareeb. This was not a land that he was familiar with. Where do you go when you're in a land that you're not familiar with? He began to turn to his companions, Ashabi, which one of you is familiar with these roads, with the side roads? One of the gentlemen, one of the companions by the name of At-Tarimah, he was a cameleer. He was a man who led a caravan. And so because he led the caravan, he knew the ins and outs of the roads. He says, Ana yabna Rasulullah. I know the ins and outs. I know how to take us to a different path. So Imam Hussein alayhi salam encouraged him. He said, then lead the way. Cameleers during those days, when they would lead their camels, they would chant. You know, in the same way that if you've ever seen someone who rides a horse or a camel, they would chant. He began to chant. He began to recite poetry. He began to recite poetry for the camels that would lead the way. He would say, Ya naqati la tad'uri min zajri, wamshi bina qabla tulu' al-fajri, bi khayri rukbanin wa khayri safri, ali Rasulillah, ali al-fakhri. He would say to the camels that, do you know who you are carrying? You are carrying very precious cargo. This is the family of Rasulullah. This is Al al-Fakhri, the family of pride. Until finally on the 2nd of Muharram, they reached Karbala. The camels did not move anymore. When they reached Karbala, Imam Hussein alayhi salam, he understood that sign. So he began to ask the local people, what is the name of this land? They said, it's known as Nainawa. He said, is it known by any other name? They said, it is known as Al-Ghadiriyat. He said, is it known by any other name? They said, it is known as Karbun wa Bala, Karbala. Karbun wa Bala, which means calamity and sorrow. It is the land of calamity and sorrow. Imam Hussein alayhi salam turns to his companions. He says, Ashabi, my companions, this is where our women will be taken captive. This is where our children will be taken captive. This is where our men will be slaughtered. So he purchased the land, knowing that it will be his land and that he will be buried there. On that day, Al-Hurr ibn Yazid al-Riyahi, he begins to inch closer and closer. He could not sleep the night before because he heard the children screaming, Al-Atash, Al-Atash, we are thirsty. We are thirsty. Al-Muhajir ibn Aus turns to Al-Hurr. He says, Oh Hurr, I see that you are inching closer and closer. He says, what is going on? He turns to him. He says, Inni ara nafsi mukhayyaratun bayna al-jannati wan-nar. He says, I see myself choosing between the hellfire and the heaven. And by God, I pick nothing over the heaven. Nothing will let me choose over the hellfire. And so he goes to the river, he gets some water. And brothers and sisters, as he moves towards the camp of Imam Hussein, there is apprehension. So the narrations say that he turns his spear upside down. He turns it the other way. He turns his shield upside down so that he does not instill any fear in the camp of Imam Hussein. He turns to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He says, Oh Allah, I ask for your forgiveness, for I have struck fear into the hearts of your awliya. I ask you, oh Allah, for forgiveness. He comes to Imam Hussein. Imam Hussein alayhi salam embraces him. He blesses him. And during the battle, Al-Hurr asks if he can have permission to go out into the battlefield. He goes out into the battlefield fighting for Imam Hussein until finally he is struck down. When he is struck down, he calls out to his master, Assalamu alayka ya Aba Abdullah. Imam Hussein instructs people to rush to him. He comes to him. He says, Oh Hurr, bakhin laka ya Hurr. Bravo, bravo, oh Hurr. Truly you are a free man, a Hurr, as your mother has named you. Inna lillah wa inna ilayhi raji'un. وسيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون والعاقبة للمتقين.
Hussein, Ya Hussein, Ya Hussein.